David Siegel, thank you so much for joining us again.
Okay, it's great to be on your show.
David, first, can you bring us up to date on where things are in Israel's operation to stop Hamas rocket fire and to destroy Hamas's network of tunnels?
Well, right now, our forces, the IDF, are engaged in a major effort to dismantle the whole network of tunnels that we have discovered. We knew about many of them through intelligence, but now that we're on the ground, we're actively dismantling, and it's an entire network, literally a catacomb, a warren of tunnels underground that are booby-trapped, that still have terrorists in them, that are embedded in civilian structures, under clinics, UN installations, under private homes, under mosques. Tragically, we had 3 brave young soldiers that were killed in a booby-trapped UNRWA health clinic the other day, and they were in the process of dismantling a tunnel opening there. So it's very complicated, very difficult, but we're determined to get that job done to protect Israel, and that's job number 1 right now.
Very, very good. In some way, by the way, this is really an irrelevancy that should be held over till after this entire operation is completed. But I'm hearing it being asked more and more, so I'll just share it with you and you can say anything you want. It seems like Israel was really taken by surprise by the extent of the tunnel network, the extent to which it is an elaborate, it is built so in such a sophisticated way, it goes so deep into Israel that what people are saying is, how could this ever have happened and Israel not be aware of it as it was being built? Israel did know how much cement was coming into Gaza. Obviously, it was not going up in buildings or hospitals or residential areas. So the question is being asked, how does Israel deal with the fact that there seems to have been a major intelligence failure here?
Well, it's a legitimate question. Like always, in these kind of situations, the reason why we excel is because we ask those questions and we debate them and we try to find better solutions next time around. But I can tell you very clearly that our intelligence was well aware of the tunnels. I myself, I served in Washington and I was involved in many of the national security issues, but we've been involved in the issue of tunnels for many, many years. Certainly when we left the Gaza Strip in 2005, there was the issue of the tunnels from Sinai into Gaza, and there was on the whole area there, and that was a major issue when we left then. So that's almost 10 years ago, and even beyond that. Now, specifically, in this case, we did know about the tunnels. We were very concerned about those tunnels. Why didn't we act is a different question. You don't always have the legitimacy to act or the ability to act when you need to or when you want to. I mean, if you think about our northern sector and what Hezbollah has built in southern Lebanon, it's no less serious. It's probably much more dangerous. Are we, now dealing with that? No. So, there's a time and place for everything, certainly for Israel in the Middle East, facing multiple fronts and multiple threats. We are now dealing with it. We knew about it. Maybe some of the extent of it or being on the ground and seeing the interconnections between different tunnels and the offshoots is something that you don't always know from afar. But the point is that now we're dealing with it. We're dismantling it. Don't know if we're going to get to all of them, but we'll certainly beat them back for many, many years. And in this way, they're losing a major strategic card that they prepared for surprise attacks on Israel in the future that they won't be able to do anymore.
Most of us hope you get every single tunnel. And my question in no way suggests that I am not 100% supportive of what Israel is trying to do to protect itself. And Hanan Ashrawi was on Sunday television arguing that the tunnels were a defensive effort by Hamas and the Palestinian people. Obviously, these tunnels were used only for offensive purposes. The only thing I can say to you, David, is that while I appreciate your answer, when we understood Israel was going into Gaza to begin with, the only thing we heard was that you were going in to stop the rocket barrage, this horrific reign of rocket terrorism, and that everybody seemed to be very surprised when all of a sudden Hamas terrorists popped up inside Israel from a tunnel, and that what we've seen as Israel seems to be explaining what they're doing now, the emphasis seems to have switched from simply eliminating rocket barrage to really an effort to destroy the tunnel, so that when Prime Minister Netanyahu talks about this operation, he talks about Israel staying there until, the extent to which every tunnel can be eliminated. That's the goal. So that although you tell me that Israel did know about the tunnels, if you did or did not, it was not something you communicated to the American people and to the public in general, and that's why you will hear Jews ask this question, how could this have happened? And it was important for me to ask it, and I appreciate the fact that you let me ask it and that you answered it. But it's because we didn't hear of this that everybody is saying, what, Israel didn't know? So I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about it, but that's the genesis of my question for you.
No, of course. And look, Hamas is presenting us with many, many challenges, and we'll be looking at this after the war as well, or after the campaign as well. But let's not forget that the reason why we launched this entire operation, Operation Protective Edge, Tzuk Eitan, was not because of the rocket fire. That was continuing against Israel from the day of the kidnapping of the three teenagers that we just observed their shloshim. On June 12th, they fired 300 rockets into Israel into July. And as you remember, we asked them to stop. We weren't interested in a conflict. We wanted to de-escalate, and every time they kept escalating. But a major part of this was a massive terror tunnel that we were on to on July 7th, the day before we launched this operation. Mm-hmm. We attacked that tunnel. We destroyed it. Several terrorists were killed inside that tunnel. This is under Kerem Shalom. And on that day, the Hamas fired over 80 rockets into Israel, which was more than all the rockets fired at Israel in 2013 by Hamas, all in one day. That triggered the entire operation. So I think tunnels have been part of this from the very beginning. Even on that was immediately the reason why we launched this operation. It was a massive tunnel, what our columnist called the mother of all tunnels. So that was a part of this as well. But remember, the goals of this operation were communicated very clearly from the beginning. It is defensive, it is limited, it is focused on dealing a blow to terrorism, securing long-term stability and peace for Israel. And by the time we entered the ground operation, the focus very much was on the tunnels, certainly on the rocket fire. But the rocket fire is coming from throughout Gaza. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it was dealing with the northern neighborhoods of Gaza, from which they were firing 40% of the rockets, mainly into the Tel Aviv area, the longer-range rockets, and dealing with the tunnels from the beginning. Very good.
David, some people think that the rocket fire from Hamas only began after the horrible situation where 3 Israeli teens were kidnapped and murdered, and then a Palestinian teen was kidnapped and murdered, and that only then did the Hamas rocket fire begin as a response to this back and forth. Remind our audience, how long has Hamas been firing rockets into Israel?
Well, the first rocket was fired into Israel in 2001.
2001.
We've already experienced, unfortunately, over 12,000 of these rockets, both before Israel left the Gaza Strip in 2005 and certainly after. And they certainly advanced their positions to fire deeper into Israel once we pulled out, which was very cynical and very unfortunate because they really had a chance to do something in Gaza that would have been different. We saw what they did with Gaza. So that's when the rocket fire began in various intensities over the years, but a total of over 12,000 rockets. But in this specific round, they began rocketing Israel on June 12th, the day of the kidnapping, even before we knew that it was a kidnapping, because remember, the three yeshiva students were going home on Thursday night, and only in the middle of the night did the families realize, or late at night, did the families realize that something was wrong, and the whole establishment was onto this by Friday morning, the 13th. That was already day 2 of the rocket fire. That rocket fire intensified throughout those 18 days that we were searching for the boys, both before and after they were found, both before and after that horrific killing of the Palestinian teenager in East Jerusalem. So it really was unrelated to all of that. We see this more as a planned provocation of Israel for all sorts of reasons that Hamas had, salary payment issues, their standing in the Arab world, their lack of legitimacy on the Palestinian street, their lack of popularity. Here they were taking out the card of provoking Israel with kidnappings. And by the way, there was a whole wave of kidnapping warnings that were going on at that time leading to this summer. So it was kidnappings and then the rocket fire, which escalated into July, as I said, when we discovered that they were operationalizing these terror tunnels. We knew about the tunnels. They weren't operationalized. Now they were. Into July, we destroyed that massive tunnel under Kerem Shalom. They fired the 80 rockets, which was a massive spike in the rocket fire, and this led to the operation to stop all of that. And this is where we are now.
Okay. By the way, you are very open with me, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And it permits me to kind of ask you every question that I hear Jews ask, and I hope you'll tell me if at some point you get tired of it. But that's what I want to do when I have you on. I want to give you a chance to answer the questions that I hear all the time. And what I've told the audience, David, is that is the contribution I want Shalom to be to make. It's that we enable people like yourself and other experts who come on to, number one, give the Israeli perspective. I want Israelis to speak in their own voice on American television. I don't want to hear it filtered through an MSNBC or a CNN reporter. And I want questions that I hear being asked by Jews when they sit around and talk. I want people like yourself to have a chance to answer those questions. So I hope you understand the context in which I do kind of throw everything but the kitchen sink at you. And I'm going to ask if that's okay. Is that okay, David?
Well, Mark, not only is that okay, but let me just tell you, it is so refreshing for me. We do so many interviews because of this conflict, and speaking to you is probably the opportunity that I have to respond to someone who is thoughtful, insightful, and ask real questions, and it gives me an opportunity to respond in the way that I'm responding. So I hope it's beneficial to your audience. It is to me.
That is very, very sweet of you. Okay, so here's my next question. What we seem to understand now is that Israel knew exactly what was happening from the moment the 3 boys were kidnapped, because there seems to be a tape recording, David, of the boys in the car being shot, and the Palestinians sort of joking and making fun of the fact that they had just killed 3 Israelis, and that in fact Israel knew, if not from day 1, within half a day from that, and that although Israel never told the world what they knew, Israel really knew from the get-go that these boys had been kidnapped and had been murdered. That is what we seem to understand now from the fact that Israel had these tapes. Would you please explain to me what Israel did or did not really know, how soon they knew it, and the reason why it's important is there are some in the Jewish community who are suggesting that Israel did something, sort of surreptitiously, that they sort of manipulated all the events that occurred from the moment these boys were kidnapped, as opposed to there being a straightforward story. And those who are critical of what Israel is doing in Gaza right now start with that event. So I want you to speak to it.
Sure, and I've heard this before. I think it's one of the most painful libels that I've ever heard, certainly coming inside the Jewish community. And I thank you for the question because it gives me an opportunity to, I guess, share some of my thoughts on this. Look, first of all, we all heard the tape, and it's gruesome. It's terrible. The tape doesn't tell you who's alive and who's dead. The tape doesn't tell you if they were fired over their heads, if they were only wounded, and so on. And everything I know about Israel and my system, and let me tell you, I know some at least, tells me that never, ever, in any fiber of our being would we trick 3 families that were hoping and praying that their boys would come home. And we have a very clear policy, and I think we saw it in the first night of the ground operation when we had 7 kids, 7 soldiers that were tragically killed in that APV, in that armored personnel carrier, by a direct rocket fire, anti-tank rocket. One of them was the American Max Steinberg from out here in Los Angeles.
Yes.
And it took so many days to identify the bodies. You can't imagine, the hell that takes place inside a tank or an APV when it's hit with a direct anti-tank rocket that penetrates, and what that means for the state of the bodies and the ability to identify who is who, and what you need to go through careful and painstaking work, both scientifically but also religiously, to determine finally if someone is dead or not. And you know that the 7th soldier, at first we declared that he was missing in action because evidently we did not have the genetic proof that he was part of the people that were in that APV, and that Hamas cynically, and this just shows you the brutal nature of our enemy, they claimed that they had a soldier. They didn't say if he was alive or dead, and they hoped that they would use that as a card, and they began manipulating the family and manipulating Israel by playing this up. And here was a race against time. We have a family they don't know if they should sit shiva or not, and the scientific work that had to be done to try to determine if we did have evidence that 7th soldier was not taken by Hamas but was actually a casualty in that APV, in that burned out structure. And in fact, we did finally reach that determination, both genetically and with the rabbinate in Israel, to decide that in fact he was not missing in action. He was actually killed, and it's makom shekvuato lo noda. So it's a person who died, but we don't know his place of burial, and it's a specific category in Judaism as well. So here we were through this painstaking work. The same thing took place in those 18 days. We would have never done this to the families. We would never do that to the people of Israel. That story is so unsubstantiated that it never even gained traction in Israel, by the way. For 18 days, we looked for those boys. We turned every stone. We put our forces in danger day and night to find them. And only when the bodies were found did we make a final and ultimate determination that those families had lost their boys, not a minute before, and not based on a tape that has, evidence of some gunfire. That is not enough to determine that someone is dead, certainly not in our culture, not in our system, and we would never do that. And for me, it is so important to underscore that fact that is not anything that Israel would ever do. We had enough reasons to go after Hamas without manufacturing them. So that's, I guess, the way I would treat that question.
I appreciate that answer very, very much. And then there's a corollary. The corollary is that although Prime Minister Netanyahu went on the air, went public with the fact that the boys were kidnapped by Hamas as if it were a Hamas operation, there are those in Israel and in the Jewish world who are saying that there has never been any proof shown by the State of Israel that Hamas operatives, Hamas terrorists, were responsible for the kidnapping and murder of these 3 boys. What's your answer for that, David?
Well, it's very simple. We know who did it, and there's a manhunt that has been ongoing for the last 49 days. We know who they are. We know that they disappeared the night of the operation of the kidnapping. We know that they were a Hamas cell. They were recognized or a known family. There's no mystery here. And we also know that this was in a much broader context of Hamas trying to foment kidnappings in Israel, and that we foiled around 70 of those attempts over the last year. And those attempts were coming out of their cells on the West Bank and in Judea and Samaria. So it's sort of a no-brainer. But let me say something wider than that and broader than that. Since 1948, since Israel was established, there's always been an excuse for Arab aggression against Israel. Even in 1948, when we know, and it's historic fact, that 5 or 7 standing armies attacked Israel right after David Ben-Gurion announced our independence in May 1948. They still excuse it by saying it wasn't us, it was the colonial powers that controlled our leadership in those days. So there's always an excuse. There's always an excuse for what Hamas is doing to us. They fired rockets at us because Israel was mean to them on the West Bank, or Israel had diabolical or nefarious ulterior motives. Let's switch it and look at why is the world silent when we say that they're arming, that they're kidnapping, that they're tunneling, that they've amassed 10,000 rockets, and nobody in the world cared. No one did anything until Israel actually responded. And when Israel finally responded, then you see the United Nations wake up. Then you see the one-sided investigations and accusations of disproportionality and all that. Had the world done something before Israel had to respond to defend itself, we wouldn't be in this situation in the first place. So if anyone cares about the Palestinian people, we would urge them to help us underscore the dangers to Israel and to the Palestinian people on the part of these terror organizations that are doing these terrible things, with the world certainly simply looking the other way until Israel is forced to respond.
Again, you say it wonderfully. I'm wondering if you have any feelings of your own. Where does these kind of criticisms of Israel emanate from in a certain wing of a far left wing of Israelis and of American Jews, let alone outright anti-Semites? But I'm talking about the fact that this is something that we hear from within the Israeli community as a whole, and I'm wondering if when you talk among your friends, when you talk among your colleagues, how do you explain the fact that there are some Jews who must find a way to turn the story so that ultimately Israel is a manipulating bad guy? Where does that come from, David?
Well, I think, Israel's a very robust democracy, and you know that there are very strong points of view, left, right, and center, and there are whole newspapers that are dedicated to channeling that point of view. So American audiences see it in English every day, plastered all over their computer screens. What the leftist criticism of Israel would be. I think now you're seeing much less of that. You're seeing really wall-to-wall support in Israel.
Almost.
I'm
you
just
are
looking,
right.
The head of the opposition, Herzog of the Labor Party, is saying that this is a battle for our home. There is such a complete consensus in Israel today that, how can you not be against taking apart tunnels that are right under kibbutzes in Israel, and everyone knows what their purpose is. Their purpose was to kill and maim civilians and kidnap them and soldiers and take them underground in those tunnels where we found handcuffs and tranquilizers and rope and IDF uniforms and detailed plans of action and maps about what they were intending to do with those tunnels. It is so clear that in Israel there's no real serious debate about this. You certainly have those columnists that are dedicated to the Palestinian point of view, and they'll continue doing that. But by and large, when you look at Israel, you look at polling, you look at the politicians, everyone is behind this operation because everyone understands that this is a battle for our home, for our families, both from the rockets above and from the tunnels below. Now, that being said, in the Jewish world, you will find those that are self-alienated, that are so dug in their anti-Zionist positions, and that they have this Pavlovian a need to delegitimize everything, that they even go, to this case of a lone soldier from Los Angeles, Max Steinberg, who goes on birthright to Israel, falls in love with his own Jewish identity, makes a choice to stay in Israel, His parents have never been to Israel before. I mean, the tragedy is they went for the funeral for the first time, and the love that they received in Israel from the 35,000 Israelis from all walks of life that went to that funeral to pay respects to a lone soldier and tell him that in Israel there is no such thing as a lone soldier. You're never alone in Israel. And that was also paying respect to the American Jewish community and to the peoplehood of Israel and Jews everywhere. But you have cases where Jews have to delegitimize this.
Mm-hmm.
So he went on Birthright and he was brainwashed.
Mm-hmm.
Birthright is a brainwashing organization. It's 400,000, millennial Jews have gone to Israel and are connected to their people and to their Judaism as a result of Birthright. The most amazing Jewish program ever invented, certainly in modern times, is being delegitimized by that hard left. The fact that he became a lone soldier, the whole process of becoming a lone soldier, rather than seeing that as bravery, courage, commitment, values, going to the level of, the founding fathers of this country talking about the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, is joining that army that is protecting the Jewish people. They delegitimize that and compare that to the jihadists going to fight in Syria. I mean, there's no end to it. There's no logic to it. These are people that are just completely disconnected from reality and from the needs of their own people, and it's very, very tragic.
Yes, it is. So I want to bring you now to the New York Times, Roger Cohn's article. And in essence, it leads me to what I consider to be the most important question I can ask you. Roger Cohn talks in his article about how he had a vision of Zionism, and somehow this action in Gaza has destroyed his idealistic vision of Zionism. And the reason for that, David, is that the visuals on American television, maybe television all throughout the world, they're just brutal. And they're portraying Israel as a callous, uncaring, brutal, mean empire power that doesn't care about the average individual, and doesn't care about killing children, doesn't care about killing women, doesn't care about killing civilians. And most of us believe that this was Hamas's ultimate aim, that the best thing for Hamas was to ultimately draw Israel into a ground battle, let alone an air battle, where they could show these very upsetting pictures, appropriately upsetting. They're tragic pictures of human beings who are, walking through the streets looking for their children, and mothers crying, and children who are either injured badly or dead. And this is what we see on American television all the time. And it's why there are so many people who are asking this question, David. Is the Israeli operation necessary as it is being executed? Is it conceivable, people asked, that even if Israel wanted to protect itself against rocket fire, wants to protect itself against this network of tunnels, it could have done it in a way that did not cost civilians so many lives in Gaza, Palestinian civilians? And again, you've permitted me to sort of throw at you the things I hear all the time, caring Jews saying about what bothers them. And in the American media, this is the mantra, day after day after day, that Israel it's not simply disproportionate. They're way over the top in destroying entire communities, parts of town, UN facilities, UN schools, UN buildings where there are Palestinians, 3,000 Palestinians huddled trying to get away from the missile attack and the ground attack of the State of Israel, and still they're hit and they're murdered. And so the question that is being asked is this necessary? Is this the only way Israel could have stopped Hamas rocket fire and put an end to these tunnels? Or is Israel just unfeeling and callous and really merits a certain kind of world condemnation? That's the biggest problem at the moment Israel faces, it seems to me, the way in which people are reacting viscerally from their gut when they see the death and destruction that is being visited on Gaza because Israel is trying to protect itself from rocket fire and tunnel attacks. So I want you to speak now to that big issue.
Well, yes, and you defined it very well, and it is the big issue, and it's very difficult, very emotional. I think, as you said, any human being, certainly any parent, anyone who has any sensibility, who sees pictures of civilians in such horrific circumstances, should be horrified. But we have to remember that there's a reason for this. There's a context here. Israel is a democracy that basically appealed to this terror organization to stop firing at our civilian population. And let's remember, in the 49 days since the kidnapping of Gilad, Naftali, and Eyal, Hamas and other terror groups have fired almost 3,000 rockets at Israel, purposely terrorizing our population. One night choosing Tel Aviv, the other night choosing Jerusalem, the third night choosing Beersheba, the fourth night playing Russian roulette with 6 to 8 million people, calling on neighborhood terror groups to participate in the rocket fire. So we have Palestinian groups in Lebanon firing into the Galilee, jihadist groups in Syria firing into the Golan Heights, jihadist groups in Sinai, maybe affiliated with Hamas, firing at Eilat repeatedly. So you really have the entire state of Israel under siege with tremendous, tremendous trauma and damage. Let's remind ourselves that this country, the United States of America, wouldn't allow one rocket. And imagine the outcry of the American public vis-a-vis the American government if you had cities from Los Angeles to New York up into New England and down into the Southwest being bombarded simultaneously every night, every day by some terror organization embedded somewhere beyond your borders in a civilian population. What would Americans do, and what would they demand? And, if you look at history here and you employ some perspective, in World War II there were 10 times more German civilians dead than Americans in war. That doesn't mean that the war against Nazi Germany was unjust. So it's difficult. We understand the difficulty. We try to minimize, more than any army in the world, civilian casualties at a direct cost to Israel, to the lives of our soldiers. We could have done this from the air like Britain and the Allies did over Germany in World War II and just carpet bomb all of Gaza without asking any questions. But the cost would be thousands upon thousands of civilians dead, because that is where purposely Hamas is firing from. So we chose to engage in a limited campaign with limited goals, sending our best kids, our young 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, into booby-trapped Gaza in order to minimize civilian casualties, in order to go after those tunnels, in order to go after those launchers, to stop the rocket fire into Israel. Now, one more thing that's very important to say. The numbers of casualties, those numbers out there, the numerology of this, that's determined by Hamas. Mm-hmm. No one is told how many out of those 12,000 dead are terrorists or civilians. You know that 10% of the rockets that Hamas fired at Israel, almost 300 rockets, fall back into Gaza. Do you think, do our questioners think that those rockets miraculously don't hit anywhere, and when they fire at our troops that they're so careful about collateral damage? So let's think for a minute about the situation that we're in. Here's Israel receiving 300 rockets, asking them to stop, and they just escalate even more, and accepting the Egyptian ceasefire, and accepting the humanitarian lulls, both by the UN and by the International Red Cross, and then again by the UN, and even Hamas asked for a ceasefire that it itself violated within the first hour, and violated in a way that they fired at our civilians at Israel. So here is a democracy under attack by a brutal terror organization that has no regard for its own people, uses them as human shields, hides underground, hides behind women and children, fires at Israel from hospitals, from UN installations, booby-trapping everything. They fire at Israel. We ask them to stop. They don't stop. They increase. We agree to ceasefires. We agree to humanitarian lulls. They violate or reject all of them. They're using those lulls to kill our troops. Yet we continue to consider them because we care about the Palestinian population. We're providing almost 1,000 truckloads of humanitarian supplies into Gaza every day. We're the ones going to the world and saying they need fuel, they need medicine, they need blood donations. Our civilians, Israeli civilians, are those truck drivers, and they're under fire at the crossings, yet we're doing this every day. We're fixing the electricity that they themselves are blowing up by firing at the transmitters in Israel. So we're doing all of that. We have a field hospital not only outside of Syria to heal those Syrian refugees coming for medical treatment in Israel, but also outside of Gaza to treat those Palestinians that need medical help. And you put all of this together, and we're in an impossible situation. We're fired at by a brutal terror organization. We're asking them to stop. They're not stopping. And we're being blamed for protecting ourselves. So it's an impossible situation. The pictures are very difficult, but there's only one answer here. We're willing to stop. They're continuing to fire. We're willing to discuss the day after in Gaza in a way that would provide the hundreds of thousands of people there with a better life. But when we see that Hamas took the cement and took the world's money and invested nothing in the people of Gaza, but took it all underground for their protection, and by the way, their leadership is sitting far away in a five-star hotel in Qatar looking at this whole situation, completely living lives of luxury with no regard for their own people, and you're looking at the people of Gaza in this impossible situation, used as human shields, threatened with arms to stay where the combat zone is rather than move out. You see them targeting UN installations on purpose, firing from there. The Secretary General of the United Nations has come out and condemned them for this and called on the world to do something about the terrorists using UN installations and turning them into military targets. Because under international law, if your troops are attacked from a civilian installation, that installation is a legitimate military target. So looking at all of this, it's an impossible situation. If Israel's condemned, they'll only do more of it, and more Palestinians will suffer. The only way out of this is to condemn those terrorist tactics that are getting worse and worse with every round, and support Israel, and look at the day after, demilitarize the Gaza Strip, take those arms away from a terror organization that wasn't supposed to have them in the first place under all the agreements that we signed with the Palestinians, and then you have a chance of putting the cement where it needs to be and building homes, schools, hospitals, and not additional tunnels underground.
David Siegel, the State of Israel is very, very lucky to have you. I'm lucky that you come on Shalom TV and are as articulate as you are. It's not as if I've run out of questions. I have more questions, but we have run out of time this time. I do hope you'll let me call you again. You are fabulous. And you know everyone here at Shalom TV only wishes the best for the State of Israel. I am very sorry for every Palestinian casualty, injury, or death. At the same time, for me, it is so simple that in this particular instance, Israel against Hamas, it's black and white, and I don't understand why the world doesn't understand it that way. I don't understand why the media in America continues to play it up. Maybe it's because, they have to make a buck, and the buck is driven by visuals, and the visuals we have are of really suffering of the Palestinian people. But that does not get to the heart of the issue as you've described it. I thank you very much for giving us this much time, but understand I'm going to chase you, I'm going to call you again, and in the meantime, you just be well, you, your family, and everyone you know in the State of Israel.
Thank you, and all Am Yisrael. Thank you very much.
Am Yisrael.
Be well.
Thank you, David.